in the mortgage business a lot about, right? You can be a technician, which is great,
Right.
but understanding business principles. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, there are a lot of changes coming down the pipe with the NAR situation and how that may or may not play out. We're coming up as we record
Yes.
this in July. It's coming up on our deadline, I think. Tell us how do you see it, what's your perspective on it, and what you're doing to prepare, and what you're advising agents right now.
So let me give you another view behind the curtain, so to speak. In 2020, I sold Benchmark to United Real Estate Holdings. And United Real Estate Holdings is now the 6th largest brokerage in North America. 27,000 agents across the country in various brands. All that is to say that because of my business experience and knowledge in building this company, I was asked to step into an additional role of EVP of strategy for United Real Estate, in addition to CEO of Benchmark Realty.
Okay.
And because of that role, I've had a seat at the table with the negotiations with the plaintiffs in these lawsuits. United Real Estate was named in 3 of the class action lawsuits, Gibson, Oompa, and Batten too. And I'm pleased to say, if you read the news reports recently, we actually settled those lawsuits, and I was one of 4 people sitting in the room when we got those negotiations done. So I have a great deal of intimate knowledge of the changes, of how these things came about. All that is to say that we have developed a strategy to lead us forward, and that includes complying by the rules, which come into effect August the 17th, 2024. And that is essentially brought about because of the lack of transparency in our industry. We always had the guaranteed sale, the guaranteed compensation component. You had a listing agent who would go to his seller and work out a deal, and he would share part of his commission. So all a buyer agent had to do was just show up, and they got paid. And as I said in the Benchmark Summit in February of 2020, the days of guaranteed shared compensation are ending. You're going to have to prove your value proposition to your buyer client. And that's a really different conversation than most folks have ever had in this industry. You do a listing presentation, you do a listing agreement with your seller, you express your value proposition to that seller and convince them to do business with you. Well, now you're going to have to do the same thing on the buyer side. Buyer presentation, sit down and talk about a presentation. Of course, the rules say you cannot show a house without a written agreement. The rules say you cannot work with a client without a written agreement that includes what you're going to get paid, how and when and by whom. So those are not necessarily the same document. We here at Benchmark have created a touring agreement. And the reason we did that, you may have seen that Zillow did something similar. We took a play on that. Somebody calls you on 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. They want to look at the house at 10 o'clock the next morning. You don't know them. They found you on your website. You don't know if you want to work with them. They don't know if they want to work with you. It's really hard to have a commission conversation in that initial call, right? Yeah. So we developed the touring agreement to say, okay, the rule says I have to have a written document. Here's the written document. It also says, the written document says, we will have a buyer presentation and we will discuss compensation once we decide that we are going to work together. So it kind of takes that pressure off of that commission conversation. Okay. And then once they have the showing and decide, a couple of showings even that you want to work together, then you sit down and do the buyer presentation, the full Monty, as it were.
So let me interrupt real quick to make sure I have clarity around that, because I really like that concept. The touring agreement is essentially doesn't have any compensation involved with it, right? It's just a written agreement that you will get 1 or 2 properties and determine if we're a great fit. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And details in rough terms what the future relationship will be once they become your client. Because at that point, they're your customer. They're not your client, right? Until you execute a bilateral agreement, they're not your client. Big misnomer in our industry. Everybody wants to call everybody they meet on the street their client. They're not your client until you execute a bilateral written agreement. So this gives you it meets the letter of the rule. It gives you an introduction and kind of takes some of that pressure off. So that when you do decide you want to work together, you meet at the office, you meet at Starbucks, wherever, do the buyer presentation, and then execute the buyer representation agreement. The key difference here is a thought process shifting from broker to broker compensation communication to client-client compensation communication. So the seller communicates with the listing agent for what they're going to pay the listing agent. The buyer communicates or negotiates with the buyer representation for what they're going to get paid. And then it all gets worked out within the confines of the purchase and sale agreement. So you're going to see contracts on the mortgage side, you're going to see contracts come through that have the real estate compensation built into the special stipulation section. It all has to be worked out within the confines of the purchase and sale agreement. So, how does a buyer agent know what they're going to get paid? Through the buyer representation agreement. That buyer may not be able to pay extra money. I get that. But that buyer can negotiate to get the buyer rep paid during the conversation of the purchase and sale agreement, during the offer and negotiation process.
So essentially, they could build that in somehow to their purchase price. Is my understanding that correct?
Well, that's possible. You can build it into the deal, period.
Okay.
Frankly, Tim, this is the way the commercial real estate world has worked for 35 years.
Okay.
If I were to show up as a tenant representative over here at Duke Realty Warehouse, they would say, you want to get paid, talk to your client. We don't offer any shared compensation, and it's very rare for a commercial listing agent to offer shared compensation. So effectively, what we're doing is moving toward where the commercial world, we're skating to the puck of where the commercial world is already hitting it. And I don't know if that's a bad thing.
No, I don't think it is. I think there's some confusion maybe still out there in the marketplace as I talk to people and just hear a variety of different comments back and forth. But you've had a front row seat to actually the negotiation in the legal realm, right? So
I think a lot of what you're hearing is the lack of broker training and broker communication with their own agents. And then in lack of communication, where do people go? They automatically catastrophize the situation. Many brokers have not paid attention to what the rules are, how we got here, what the meaning of the lawsuits are. And so therefore they just have either A, stuck their head in the sand and refused to train their agents on it, or B, said, don't worry about it, NAR is going to take care of it. Well, let me tell you, NAR is the one that got us into this because they didn't handle it correctly on the front end, and having faith and confidence that NAR is going to get us out of it is insanity. We are the only ones that are going to get us out of it. So you got three classes of brokers: those that stick their head in the sand, those are kind of sort of doing some training, and those that are going full bore after it to make sure their agents are the best trained in the marketplace. And that would be Benchmark Realty and United Real Estate.
Yeah, I love that. So if I'm a real estate agent right now, and I'm out in the marketplace and I'm hearing a lot of different things, which I do hear this from them. One person will have this opinion and another person will have that opinion. It ranges from nothing's really changing to everything is changing. These are the conversations that I typically hear. But if I'm an agent right now and I want to be within the letter of the law, I really like this concept of this touring agreement. To go into that in just a minute. So I have a touring agreement that allows me to maybe show someone a house, right? And during that process, we're getting to know each other and they're going to determine if they're going to become my client. Now it's up to me to provide value. And I love what you said about that. That's something that historically I've not seen many people execute very well at in the buyer's agency side of things, right? Why choose me, right? So that's going to be a topic that people are going to have to really come to grips with as to why you would be the best for that. So then we move over to the actual representation contract. They're like, you know what? I like you. This looks like it'll work out well. And we work out their agreement, 1%, 3%, 2%, a flat fee. Is there any kind of limitations on that I've got to work within, or is that just whatever I can negotiate with my clients?
Well, of course, everything falls underneath the policies of the broker. If the brokerage says you may do X and Y, but you may not do Z, then as an agent with your license there, you have to follow that policy. So be clear on that. And by the way, a lot of this will vary state to state. There are some states, unbelievably, that still allow dual agency. Tennessee is one of those states that allows it legally. We have had a policy for 18 years ruling it out where you better not do it here. We use designated agency. That's a whole different rabbit trail. I don't want to go down that. But the bottom line is that if you can't articulate your value proposition, we give our agents scripts. Well, what if I don't get this? And what if I don't get that? And what if I can't say this? And what if I can't pay this as a buyer during the buyer presentation conversation? It's a problem. It's a problem. You have to have that knowledge. I expect, Tim, that we're looking at a 20% or more fallout rate in agents in the industry nationally because of the lack of the ability to understand internally what their own value proposition is, what they bring to the table. Our suggestion is pick up the phone, call your last 5 clients, tell me what the good and the bad of your experience with me was, and then there, boom, becomes your value proposition. You heard it straight from the mouth of your client, your past client, what your good things were, what your bad things were, and then homogenize your script going forward around that. And I think if you do that, you'll be fine. The catastrophization really just kills me because it's just total ignorance. If you look at it functionally, there's 3 basic things that have changed. One is there's no mention of compensation anywhere in the MLS, not in comments, not in remarks, not in flyers attached to an MLS listing, not in photographs. On the flip side of that, you can put a sign writer out. You can put a pillow on the sofa that says, I'll pay you 3 pizzas if you sell this house. You can fly a hot air balloon over the house. Those are all permissible. Why you do that, I don't know, but they're permissible.
All right.
But you can even have a flyer stating it. Our MLS here has created a concessions field, which is a communication from the seller to the buyer that they are offering concessions and negotiability in the price of the home. So basically at this price, we offer these concessions. It's a toggle field. And what we're recommending to our affiliates is toggle it on, but leave the slot blank. Don't try to put a number in there. Don't peg a number. Let it be worked out during negotiations. But by toggling it on, you're telegraphing to the buyer that we have negotiability here to pay your buyer agent. You can even put in private remarks on MLS, buyer agent welcome. You just can't put a number in there. You can't put a percentage in there. You can't specifically say what that is.
Okay.
So interesting times. But that's the first one. Big change is no compensation MLS. The second one is you've got to have a written agreement before working with a client. And then the third one is it's got to show up clearly. You've got to explain the proposition on how all the money flows. Big thing in the lawsuit was 72% of buyers that were surveyed either had no idea or very little idea how their agent got paid. That is an abject failing on the part of our industry. And that's why we wound up where we are.
So here's a question that I've heard a lot. Love to get your perspective on. A listing agent meets with a seller, right? And they're going through their value proposition and what will transpire in order for that agent to sell the home. Are they allowed to discuss what buyer agents may bring to the table and build in an expectation to their seller, or is that something they can't talk about?
Not only are they allowed, I think that is a key point, and I thank you for bringing that up because that is the key point that a listing agent should be doing that. The last thing you want as a listing agent is an unrepresented first-time home buyer showing up in the transaction. Somebody's going to get toasted, and it's probably going to be an unrepresented buyer who doesn't know what they don't know. Bless their hearts, they just don't know. And then that's lawsuit city. So I think because of that, if listing agents fail to understand what you just said and what we're talking about here, you're going to see an exponential rise in lawsuits from buyers a year after. You didn't tell me. You were supposed to tell me. You were supposed to represent me. And most listing agents don't really explain the representation conversation very well to unrepresented buyers. Our guys do because we hammer it, but a lot of them don't. So I think you're going to have some problems there. But I think that's a responsibility of the listing agent to have that conversation with their seller to make sure they understand exactly the pitfalls and the positives and the negatives of sharing buyer agent compensation.
Okay, I love that. So in your opinion, in conversations that you have had, do you think there'll be some commission compression that happens across the industry as a result of this? And if so, what percentage are you guys estimating?
Well, we've already seen it, right? Over the last 15 years, a gradual commission compression. But I think the direct answer to the question is yes, absolutely. Those who don't have the ability to express their value proposition, they want to compete on price. So the guy who or a gal who doesn't have the ability to articulate their value prop to a buyer, then they're going to say, I'll just go straight to the price. You see it in mortgage origination all the time. I mean, people,
Sure.
they compete on price. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it does create commission compression. And I think we're going to see a considerable amount. Right now, reluctant to talk percentages, so I'll call pizzas, right? That's gone from, you know, it's running around 5 pizzas now.
Okay.
I think you're probably going to see that move on down to the 4 range. I
Okay.
don't know. Those that are professional, and here's what I keep telling my folks is that you're going to see the uneducated, untrained, badly skilled real estate agent begin to fall away. You know, the person that's doing 0 to 3, it's just not worth the hassle anymore. They don't want to go to the training. They don't want to prepare a buyer representation. They just don't want to do it anymore. So I think they're gone. As that comes about, and the professionals who are really able to articulate their value on both sides of the conversation are the ones who will really just eat market share. And the better they are at that, the more market share they'll get, and they'll make up on volume what they may lose on commission compression. But I think definitely commission compression is headed our way at a more rapid pace than it has in the past.
Prior to 2008, the mortgage space was referred to by many people as the Wild Wild West, because you would meet a loan originator and they had this ability to move the rate up and down. Their compensation was tied into the rates, and there were people that would do 1 or 2 transactions a month and make really a large amount of income. And then in 2008, the regulatory agencies came in and really started to hone in on what was fair and reasonable compensation to an originator. And by and large, today, a lot of originators out there work for 1%, by and large. And so we found during that time was you had the 1 or 2 a month loan officers, 1 or 2 deals a month that made 4, 5, 6, 7%, whatever it was. They left. Mm-hmm. And the remaining originators all of a sudden were faced with this challenge of like scalability.
Correct.
Right. So if I've been reduced to 1% as an originator on average, or some more, but let's just use that as an average, I've got to learn how to scale. I can't just work with 1 or 2 clients. It's Absolutely. Not going to be enough, right? So are y'all addressing scalability, and do you think that will be something that the agents will have to learn to look at and how to figure that out?
Yes, absolutely. The beautiful part of our comp model is that we are a fee-based model, not a percentage-based model. So if you understand the difference in those, percentage-based model would be the traditional broker. You know, the agent brings in a $10,000 check, the broker takes 3,000 of it, pays them 7. That's a 70-30 split. Okay, that's the traditional broker. We are a fee, so we charge a fee per transaction. So the dollar volume of the transaction matters nothing to us. What they charge for commission matters nothing to us. They can charge 0 or 20%. Our fees are the same. In fact, if they charge 0, they're actually going to write us a check for our fees. That's how our structure works. So in that model, it gives us complete autonomy, and it gives us as a brokerage, we must scale, because when you're working on a smaller company dollar, you've got to have more clicks. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, think of when I was in the printing business, we used to do a lot of work with Xerox, and a lot of times Xerox would give you the machine for the click charges. They charge you a dime or a penny per click. They want a lot of clicks. That's our model. So in that scenario, and going back to what I said about commission compression and those professionals that are going to really excel through this, those are the folks who are already business people, who already understand how to scale, and they understand that they've got a system in place. They just have to replicate it and grow it. And just like there are many loan officers that have really blown it up since those changes came about in your industry, it's a very similar change scenario that's happening. You know, the government has come in, In this case, it was a lawsuit with plaintiff attorneys, but the DOJ's right behind them. Looking at it and saying, this industry's fouled up. You didn't self-regulate, so we're going to help you do that. And in this case, we're doing it through lawsuits. But if it weren't through lawsuits, I promise you the FTC and the DOJ would be right in there. I don't know if you realize this or not. This is another rabbit trail, but it is some good background. In July of 2021, the president issued an executive order, 14,036. And the paragraph in there was in the interest of improving competition in America. There's a paragraph in it that specifically addresses residential real estate. And he said to the director of the FTC, you will investigate the residential real estate industry for unfairness practices because their current commission policies are driving up home prices in America. That's almost a direct quote. You can go look it up. So that gave the FTC their hunting license, but the FTC is a regulatory agency. They're not a judicial agency. And you're dealing with private enterprise. You have to first break it through judicial. So that's where the DOJ and the plaintiff attorneys got involved. I believe the DOJ is driving the entire process at this point, even though Catchmark and the others are the plaintiff attorneys. But I believe the DOJ is right in the same office with them, if not looking over their shoulder.
So there was a number of agencies named in lawsuits, a number that I believe were not. So the people that were not, are they susceptible to being sued down the road, or does this settle it for the entire industry?
Everybody's on their own. It's the NAR settlement covered all brokerages below $2 billion in total real estate sold.
Okay.
Okay. So those guys are all off the hook. Unfortunately, there were about 84 brokerages, including United Real Estate and Benchmark independently is above 2 billion that were uncovered. So essentially, our national organization gave the 90 some odd largest brokers in the country the middle finger, said you're on your own. So we've had to go negotiate and mediate on our own without their support. But all of the smaller brokerages, they're off the hook, pretty much universally. On the seller side lawsuits, they still have to address the buyer side lawsuits. But if you know how settlements work, you can understand on the seller side, once that is settled, that pretty much takes about 70% of the economics out of the buyer side lawsuit. It's really hard, antitrust, and I don't want to get too technical here, but in antitrust, you have to be the consumer of the product. And since the seller was the one paying both commissions previously, the buyer was not really the consumer of the product. They weren't really being the ones that were having to pay on paper. But who's the only one that shows up at closing with money? It's the buyer. So, that's where those lawsuits came from.
That's fantastic. So just to kind of concise this article up, the points that I made reference of, as an agent, you need to be fully aware of the new rules, and with an agency that's fully aware of the new rules. Like, you don't want to be out there unprotected from that.
Correct.
Number two, you got to be really good at your value proposition.
100%.
Excellent at that. So maybe this is a good time to rebrand, package, and promote yourself in a brand new light.
Absolutely.
And then number three that I took away, the buyer's agent commission can still be negotiated into the overall transaction from the purchase of the property. And that's really incumbent upon the listing agent to make sure they have a quality conversation and help the sellers understand that when the house is going to the marketplace. Those were my big three takeaways. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it. I think on the buyer agent compensation, the buyer agent compensation can come from three places. It can come through the transaction from the seller. It could come through the transaction from the listing agent because they've already worked this out ahead of time. It can come if you want to add it to the sales price, as long as the home appraises, should be fine. And then thirdly, the buyer can come out of pocket with whatever deficiency in their agreement with the buyer representative is. So those are the key points to remember. You got it nailed. I think you've done a good job there.
Well, good. I got one last question. We're going to wrap this thing up. If I'm a buyer's agent and I negotiate with my buyer, say a 2% commission, right? And we go and we find a home and we're unsuccessful in figuring it into the deal. Maybe we figure in 1% into the deal, for example, and that leaves 1% unaccounted for, right? And my buyer and doesn't have the ability to cover that. What are the options at that point? Can I renegotiate my buyer's agreement, or will we just have to stick with the original plan?
Well, a buyer representation agreement is a contract between the buyer, broker, and the buyer. So any contract, as you know, can be renegotiated at any time.
Okay.
It can be amended at any time. An important point that I did miss here is that buyer rep can accept less than what's in the buyer rep agreement, but they cannot accept more than what's in the buyer rep unless they amend that agreement.
Okay.
But it can come from the buyer. It can come by adding it back to the purchase price. It can come from negotiations with the seller. It really depends on the market and how badly the seller wants to sell the house.
Listen, I appreciate your time. We're going to have your bio in here and the ways people can contact you. That will be in the article. And I just want to thank you for your time today. I know it's super valuable, and this was some great insight. And I got more knowledge today, which I'm very, very thankful for. So I definitely appreciate you.
I'm glad to help, buddy. Glad to help.
All right, my friend. Well, you have a great day.
Okay.
All right. If I can do anything for you, you let me know.
We'll do it. Thank you, buddy. Bye.